The work today begins right now. Thanks for joining us. I'm Melissa Walker in Lagos. US President Joe Biden is on a one-day visit to the UK and just a while ago met with King Charles III. It will be the president's first meeting with Charles since the coronation in May, a move set to be in line with the long-standing practice of US presidents. The anthems of both countries rang out across the grounds of Windsor Castle before they both went inside. They were also pictured sharing a moment of laughter outside after a ceremonial welcome of red-jacketed Welsh guards. They were said to have discussed issues surrounding climate change with top financiers and philanthropists. King Charles himself has been an advocate on climate issues for the past 50 years. The King has also been meeting US presidents since he was a child. In 1959, at the age of 10, then Prince Charles was around when then US President Dwight Eisenhower met Queen Elizabeth II in Balmoral. In 1970, Prince Charles was in the White House where he met with the then President Richard Nixon. President Joe Biden, who's been around politics for a long time, has also met a number of British prime ministers, meeting Theresa May in May 2019, and then Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and today Rishi Sunak.
All the flowers bloom.
Well, speaking of the current British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, he met with President Biden hours before at number 10. The US President told Sunak the relationship between the US and Britain is rock solid, despite clashes over Washington's decision to supply Ukraine with cluster munitions and Ukraine NATO membership. Their meeting, a low-key one, is the fifth in many months. President Biden told the British Prime Minister that he could not be meeting with a closer friend and a greater ally.
Able to get approval from Turkey this week?
It's great to have you here, back in Downing Street. I think you've been here a few times before, I know, but your first time as president, so we're very privileged and fortunate to have you here. Thanks for coming. Great for us to carry on our conversations, which we were having just a month or so ago, it feels like, in the White House, where we signed the Atlantic Declaration, the first of its kind economic partnership, which I know we'll be talking about today. How do we strengthen our cooperation and joint economic security to the benefit of our citizens, but also we in that alliance, and I know we'll want to do everything we can to strengthen Euro-Atlantic security. But great pleasure to have you here.
Let's bring in our London correspondent, Juliana Lainka, for more on this visit. Hi, Juliana. The US president, on his way now, we understand, to Vilnius, but let's get an overall view of his visit to the UK. What was the general perception?
Good afternoon, Melissa. Well, it's been a busy day for the 80-year-old POTUS, who has been in a string of meetings in the United Kingdom. Of course, Air Force One touched down at Stansted, which is just east of London in Essex, at about 9:40 this morning. I know there's been lots of talk on social media about a certain entourage in Nigeria, but my goodness, there is no entourage bigger than US President Joe Biden's, which is why he was probably late for his meeting with Rishi Sunak. Of course, you were just playing those pictures there. And I think it's safe to say that Joe Biden has been pretty modest in his approach to Britain and his relationship with of Rishi Sunak pretty much started as a slow burner, but certainly it's going from strength to strength. I think there was a little bit of headache, shall we say, from Joe Biden's strained relationship with the Prime Minister's predecessor, Boris Johnson. They famously didn't get on. In fact, apparently there were a series of frantic calls that Boris Johnson tried to put through to Joe Biden that were ignored. He wasn't sure about Rishi Sunak at first. And I think this is really down to one issue, and that is Brexit. We know that Joe Biden, of course, has strong Irish ancestry. This was put on full display during his last visit to the United Kingdom, where he didn't come to Great Britain, which is the other side of the water from the island of Ireland. He spent his time in the north and in the south. And of course, he didn't go to King Charles III's coronation on the 2nd of May. He sent the First Lady, Jill Biden. So I think this was a really important meeting. He has, of course, as Rishi was saying in that track, been to Downing Street several times, but this was his first time entering Downing Street as president. I believe the two spent about 30 minutes speaking off camera. It was a very brief meeting because, of course, they're going to spend lots of time together amongst other world leaders in Lithuania for that very important NATO summit. But they did speak about the Atlantic Declaration. That was an agreement that was signed last month during Rishi Sunak's visit to the White House. The Atlantic Declaration is basically an agreement to foster stronger economic relations in the wake of China's dominance on the world. So that was great, I think, for both countries to discuss that. And then, as you say, he went via helicopter, I believe, to Berkshire, which is where Windsor Castle is, just west of London. As to be expected, full pomp and pageantry display from King Charles III, who gave Joe Biden and his entourage a very royal welcome. The two, of course, are very similar in age. I believe Joe Biden at 80 is about 4 years older than King Charles. You've just gone through the history of their kind of interactions, and they both have sons who they're not, let's say, too pleased with at the moment. So I'm sure they had lots of private chats with that. But it was quite an important meeting because away from the pomp and pageantry, there was quite an important discussion about climate change. And that was where we did see some government ministers like Grant Shapps, who's now the business and energy secretary, as well as John Kerry, a seasoned statesman who is now America's climate envoy. They were talking about how they were going to raise private funds to tackle the climate emergency, which is really taken a grip, not just in the global south, but of course we're seeing extreme temperatures in London and in some parts of America. So that was a very important. As you said, he has left the United Kingdom now, and I suppose the focus for the rest of the week will be the war that's raging in Europe.
And Juliana, quite interesting. You mentioned this is President Biden's first meeting with the British monarch since he became king. What do Britons make of the body language between both men? I mean, they have so much in common. You've mentioned a few. They're age one, and they have grandchildren, and also began leading in old age.
No, you're absolutely right. It's quite difficult, isn't it? Because the mood music, where we usually go to check the temperature of the mood, is Twitter. And on social media, nobody's talking about Joe Biden being in the United Kingdom, which is interesting because, of course, we know that the UK and the US over several decades have shared this very special relationship. How special is it at the moment? That is what we're not so sure about. But of course, we know that, you know, he's whistle-stop tour to the United Kingdom is incredibly important for both leaders. It comes at a time where Joe Biden is going into an election year next year in America. He has strong opposition from, of course, the Republican Party, but within his own party, some people just think that he's just way too old. And some of the issues that are creeping up because of his son Hunter are causing lots of fear. Secondly, as well, for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, very similar situation. He is going into a general election next year, we think, at the latest, and he is certainly under pressure from the Labour side, who consider him weak, particularly because of the way he's handled bad behaviour in the Conservative Party. So in terms of the optics, for both leaders standing shoulder to shoulder, it should reflect well domestically, but unfortunately for Rishi Sunak, and we've just got so many more issues, like the fact that we're going through a significant cost of living, like the fact that we've got mortgage holders and anybody with a big loan suffering because of high interest rates, and these are issues that Rishi Sunak himself has to sort out domestically. So a few years ago, perhaps standing shoulder to shoulder with the US president would have garnered much more press inches and column inches, and would have struck some sort of chord with voters. But there are so many other issues that are distracting individuals that perhaps the importance of this meeting hasn't garnered the interest that both leaders would have expected and hoped for.
Juliana, about the touchy subject of supply of cluster bombs to Ukraine, a decision made unilaterally by the US. Britain does not support that announcement. Did that come up at all in the conversation with the US President and Prime Minister Sunak?
I don't think so. Of course, I know that the press who were invited were kind of door-stopping, trying to get some sort of reaction from each of the leaders. But, as you said in your intro, Millicent, Joe Biden said on the record that their relationship has always been strong. So, alluding to the fact that there are no disagreements over Ukraine, although we know there is. The idea that the US has or intends to send cluster munitions to Ukraine is an issue for the United Kingdom and other allies who have signed up to some sort of pact or treaty saying that they would never use them or create them because they're indiscriminate anytime that they have been used in the battle. We know that tens of thousands of innocent people have been inflicted or even killed because of them. So they don't see why America would want to deploy them. Of course, America hasn't signed up to this legal pact, so they are free to do whatever they want. But it's not just about the cluster munitions. It's also about Ukraine's NATO membership. Now, I do believe that over the weekend, a White House spokesperson once again doubled down on the sentiment that they've held for months, is that Ukraine is not ready for full NATO membership. And we know that the UK is leading the Western allies trying to fast track Ukraine's membership. So it's going to be interesting. I think, let's not forget that even though the UK, first led by Boris Johnson, wants to be seen as the leader of the Western Front against Russia, but the biggest NATO contributors by far is America. So what they say does really matter. So even if they are at loggerheads for a few issues, clearly the leader of the free world would have the final say on certain issues.
Juliana Leinker, our London correspondent. Many thanks, Juliana. In the meantime, Patriot air defense batteries have been on display today ahead of the NATO meeting in Vilnius, Lithuania tomorrow. The US President Joe Biden, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, French President Emmanuel Macron, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak are among 31 NATO leaders expected at the summit. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is also expected to attend and to press for Ukraine to be admitted into NATO soon after the Russian invasion comes to an end. This will be NATO's fourth summit since the invasion, the first holding virtually on February the 25th, 2022. And while Ukraine's NATO membership is very likely to come up in the meeting on Tuesday, the Kremlin thinks a Ukraine membership would only result in consequences for Europe's security architecture. Spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says Russia would consider such a step a threat, which demands a harsh response. Speaking to reporters during a telephone press conference, Mr. Peskov reminded that Ukraine's security architecture is already half destroyed in Europe. He says it will be an absolute danger, a threat to the country, which would require Russia to react clearly and firmly. Well, Canada, on the other hand, has pledged to deploy up to 1,200 more troops in Latvia as part of a NATO plan to reinforce its battalions deterring Russian aggression in the Baltic region to combat ready brigade level. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made the announcement at a press conference with his Latvian counterpart at the Adzi military base in Latvia after an agreement was signed. Canada leads a NATO-light battalion in Latvia, currently 1,700 strong, intended to expand into a larger response force should Russia invade NATO territory. But NATO had already said the force, along with similar battalions in Estonia, Lithuania and Poland, will be strengthened to become combat capable.
Today, I am announcing that we are going to more than double our presence, deploying up to an additional 1,200 members of the Canadian Armed Forces to serve and defend democracy and the rule of law. This is part of a $2.6 billion investment we are announcing today, which also includes the purchase of critical weapons systems and support for intelligence and cyber activities. Almost a dozen countries from across NATO are cooperating, training and working alongside each other and learning valuable lessons from each other that make our collective defense stronger. But I know there is a deep commitment to Ukraine's security and to Ukraine's future, shared by all members of NATO. And the conversations on exactly how we're going to articulate that are continuing right now. But I'm very optimistic that the message that we will send, not just to the Ukrainian government, not just to the Ukrainian people, but also to Russia about how strong and solidaire we all are, is going to be an important one.
There are other countries apart from Ukraine seeking NATO membership, talking about Sweden and Finland. But Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, who had been in the way, especially for Sweden, says the European Union should open the way for Ankara's accession to the bloc before it approves Sweden's bid. Ankara says Sweden has not done enough against people Turkey sees as terrorists, mainly because many members of the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party PKK, which is considered a terrorist organization by Turkey, the EU and the United States. Turkey's bid to join the EU has been frozen for years after membership talks were launched in 2005 under Erdogan's first term as Prime Minister. While Finland's NATO membership was green-lighted in April, Turkey and Hungary have yet to clear Sweden's bid. Stockholm has been working to join the bloc at the summit in Vilnius. Well, back to the subject of Ukraine. Germany is expected to announce new support packages for the country at the summit in Lithuania. Defense Ministry Boris Pistorius and various French counterparts, Sebastian Lecornu, said they hoped Sweden would quickly become a member of NATO and that they were curious as to how Turkey and Hungary would act at the summit. Pistorius underlined the unique friendship of the two countries after Germany upset France in October when it announced the plan with 14 NATO allies to purchase air defense systems that partly come from the US and Israel in a drive to protect allied territory from missile attacks following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Well, as for Ukrainians, the meeting in Vilnius, lacking full endorsement of pathway for Ukrainians, would send a message that the West is afraid of Moscow. A cross-section of respondents in Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, say while they recognize democracy and tolerance, one has to remember that there is nothing better than words backed by arms. They say even the U.S. president is afraid of escalation of the war as Ukraine's membership of NATO is inevitable. Others encourage Ukraine to join NATO as world peace depends on it. Even though Russia is aggressive, they say it will not stop. Welcome back. We're continuing with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has held talks with Wagner mercenary Yevgeny Prigozhin and his commanders to discuss the armed mutiny Wagner attempted to mount against the army's top brass. According to the Kremlin, the meeting held on June the 29th, 5 days after the aborted mutiny, widely regarded to have posed the most serious challenge to Putin since he came to power on the last day of 199, and that Putin had invited 35 people to the meeting, which lasted 3 hours, including Prigozhin and Wagner unit commanders. The brief mutiny led by Prigozhin, in which Wagner fighters took control of the southern city of Rostov-on-Don and a military headquarters building, was diffused in a deal brokered by Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko. Putin, who likened the events to the turmoil which engulfed Russia in the run-up to the 1917 Russian Revolution, has since thanked his army and security services for averting chaos and civil war. Prigozhin has said the mutiny was not aimed at overthrowing the government, but at bringing to justice the army and defense chiefs for what he called their blunders and unprofessional actions in Ukraine. He was meant to leave for Belarus under the terms of the deal that ended the mutiny, but the Belarusian president said last week the Wagner fighters had not yet taken up the offer to relocate. Meanwhile, 4 people have been killed in a Russian attack on a humanitarian aid distribution point in the southeastern Ukrainian region of Zaporizhzhia. National Police of Ukraine released video showing destroyed school building and bodies being carried away by police officers. Regional Governor Yuri Malashko said a guided aviation bomb was used in the attack on a school building being used as an aid distribution point. Malashko said on the Telegram messaging app that 3 women and a man, all in their 40s, had been killed. The General Prosecutor's Office said 13 had also been wounded. The office said it had opened a criminal case into war crimes after the attack on the town of Orikhiv, which it said was carried out Sunday afternoon. Well, we're still staying with the Russian invasion. Let's bring in VOA's correspondent, Ricardo Marquina, who joins us from Moscow. Hi, Ricardo. Russia is definitely not excited about this NATO meeting tomorrow in Lithuania. What is the Russian media saying about it?
Thank you very much for having me. So Russian media, we must understand that Russian media is absolutely under control of the Russian government. So the Russian media is just talking, is just repeating what the Kremlin tell them to repeat. So now they put this meeting in Vilnius as another step, another aggressive step of NATO, especially for the United States, to provoke to Russia. We listen some kind of very hard statements from Russian propaganda that is another step to the World War, that is a provocation to go further in the war, to bring the war to the Baltics. But we must understand this as internal rhetoric. So it's used as speech to give to the internal Russian public and to present the meeting in the NATO meeting in Vilnius as a meeting of the enemy, and present again Russia as the savior of the Russian world, especially in Ukraine.
And is that having any impact on, citizens in Russia in terms of the mood on the eve of this NATO summit?
Yes. So the situation now is we don't have nothing new in Russia. We have not. Russia is not having any kind of victories in Ukraine. So and Russia have another problems, much more problems that the meeting in Vilnius as we have this coup in Russia a few weeks ago from the group Wagner. So the feeling in Russia is very dark. The feeling of the people that support the war is also very, very dark. There are Russia is not having good news in the battlefield for so long that it's very difficult to give the public something good, some kind of victory, even for pure propaganda. So this meeting is not giving nothing new. We will have only more threats from Russian side and use more negativity as far there are not coming any kind of good news from the front lines.
And one wonders how much more threats, because we've heard from Mr. Peskov, who, said that there will be consequences for Europe. And then on the other hand, we have the US that's actually pulling back for NATO support for Ukraine.
Yeah, Russia usually Kremlin come every week with a nuclear threat to the world. So we are losing. You are supporting Ukraine. So this is it's one step more to the nuclear war. This is the rhetoric of Russia. What more they can do? Really nothing, because we saw it when United States announced that the giving of modern tanks, Abrams or the German tanks, we have a very, very strong words from Kremlin. But really, they didn't do nothing serious. The only thing that they can do is to break the agreement of grain, the grain that is leaving from Odessa, especially for African countries. So this will be a very hard step, as Russia like to present himself as the friend of African countries. So I don't think we will see this happening anytime soon. So I don't think that Russia will break the grain agreement with Ankara and with Kiev.
Do we know what the next step is? And this is for Wagner and Russian president.
So we know only that the Kremlin told us. Kremlin told that they have a meeting a few days ago between Putin and Prigozhin in the Kremlin. That is really an astounding situation, because when all the coup was happening, Putin told that all people, including Prigozhin, there was traitors. And now we know that they meet together after that in Kremlin. But on the other hand, it's weeks already. We have not photos, videos, or audios of Prigozhin. So there are a lot of speculation. Where is Prigozhin? Is he really alive? We don't know nothing. We only have the word of Kremlin that tell that he meet with Putin. But it's very strange for a person that loves to be on media every single day with very hard speeches. So we don't know nothing about Prigozhin for the last 3 weeks. Is he alive? And where is he? This is the biggest mystery right now in Russia.
And finally, Ricardo, before I let you go, peace talks. Is the Russian government looking towards peaceful mediations, and this is with Ukraine, at all?
Well, I don't think so. Every time that someone brings the peace to the table, we have 1 week ago, the envoy from the Pope Franciscus of Rome here in Moscow, with a message of peace and understanding each other. And that when he was here, Peskov, the spokesperson of Kremlin, told again, it's not first time, that now is not time for peace. So Russia, Kremlin, is still thinking that they can win the war. So they don't want peace talks. They still want to put the Russian flag in the center of Kiev.
Ricardo Moquina, VOA's correspondent in Moscow, many thanks.
Thank you.